Thanks, Lord Skidelsky, for agreeing for this to this interview. My first question is modern economics overly dependent on mathematics?
Yes.
That's it? All right. Do you wanna give some alternatives? What are some alternatives to mathematics that could help shift economics towards something else, like you mentioned, behavioral and psychological outlets?
Yeah, I think if it started taking history seriously, if it started taking sociology seriously, if it started taking philosophy seriously, and of course behavioral psychology, these would lessen the weight of maths. I mean, the weight of maths is due to its very, very narrow approach, and it's basically it's optimizing foundation, and that is what leads to economics being associated too much with maths. I'm not saying maths hasn't got its place. It's quite important for all kinds of problems, but economics is much bigger than maths.
We're currently taking a Rethinking Economics course. We were wondering, what's your take on curriculum reform when it comes to teaching economics?
I think we need a new curriculum because I think the old one is rather ossified, and the textbooks are ossified. Even though there's new work going on in economics, which is interesting, it takes a long time before it gets translated into standard textbooks. So you've got to start on it. I think there has been, there's a new interesting curriculum, partly supported by INET, the Institute for New Economic Thinking, written by Wendy Carlin and David Soskis. I think they've got interesting things in it. I don't think it goes far enough. I think it still basically relies on neoclassical methodology in order to address a wider set of issues, certainly. So there's scope for introducing into the curriculum much more history of economic ideas, much more economic history, more sociology, just to get the thing I was talking about, really, a better idea of how the whole works without having to build it up from these little micro bits. And I think that's a methodological question, but I think it would be very good if students were made aware of that as a problem, of how to connect up micro and macro.
All right. My second question you may have touched upon in the talk, and it's related to the UK. Do you think Cameron's continuous cuts to government spending helped or hampered the economic recovery?
I think the whole of the austerity programme hampered the economic recovery. I think Britain could have recovered sooner, and I think the recovery would have been less flaky had they had a proper public investment programme through 2011 to 14, 15. Now, of course, because the recovery didn't happen quickly, they missed their budget targets, so they now have to have another big bout of cuts in order to, they think, achieve those, and that will also make the recovery weaker than it would otherwise have been.
Okay. What do you think are the main causes of growing income inequality in the West?
That's a big question. I would say there are a number of factors. One of them is globalization. A second is big changes in the tax system in favor of the wealthy. In fact, decline in the progressivity of the tax system, and then the way power is structured in the economy. The owners of capital are claiming much too high rewards for their efforts. And that hasn't been offset as it was in the past by government policy, whether taxes or full employment or increases in welfare. And so I think they've allowed inequality to grow. In fact, they've welcomed its growth as providing superior incentives for the rich, as though they didn't have enough incentives already.
All right. I'll follow on that, and I'll say that during the Thatcher years, the Gini coefficient for England increased by 40%. Similarly, it increased, Similarly, it increased by 20% in America during the Reagan years. Both are regarded as periods of economic reinvention and growth, and both are coupled with the respective countries' largest increase in income inequality. Do you think there are some positive effects to economic inequality, to income inequality?
I don't think so. I think most studies show that the more more equal incomes in a society are, that doesn't mean complete equality by any means, but that the more equal they are, the faster the rates of growth, the more content people are with the country they're living in, and it must also be the case that the more opportunities they have for developing their own full capacities of getting more fulfilling jobs and so on. I think it's a very souring social happening when you get big increase in inequality, and I think it's quite dangerous if it goes very, very far. People will, poor people will not identify with the society any longer, and they'll be prey to all kinds of extremist temptations.
All right. Staying on the topic of the UK, do you think that Jeremy Corbyn has the economic expertise to lead a possible Labour majority?
No political leader has any economic expertise at all, and certainly no prime minister. But I mean, they have instincts, and I think his instincts are quite good. I still feel, though some people don't agree with this, that introducing people's quantitative easing into a discussion on the desirability of a public investment bank and how it's to be financed was a little bit of a red herring. I'm not sure that you might not need that kind of quantitative easing in the future, but at the moment you can borrow it the government can borrow at almost zero interest rates. Why does it need to print money? There are masses of money already in existence, which is sort of idle. I mean, every report says this. The corporate profits are not being invested, and pension funds, and they're awash. Banks are awash with cash. Get some of it out and put it to work. I don't think at this point. I think quantitative easing is a bit of a red herring.
All right. And staying again on the topic of the UK, what do you think of the decreased privatization and decreasing independence of British universities since the early 1900s?
Early 1900s? Are you going back
1920? Yeah.
Do you think it's a long period? Do you want to go back so far? I mean.
Oh well, I mean we can go back 25 years if that's better.
Yeah. I think well, it's part of this obsession with getting outputs out of the system which can justify money being given to them. But it's a narrow and very, very mean approach, because many of the outputs they don't come about through deliberate planning of work, especially research work. A lot of it should be unguided. I mean, it shouldn't. People should be given time to develop ideas. And as far as students are concerned, on the whole, I think governments should treat university education as a public good, and it should be financed out of the tax system. But there's a lot of resistance to that, and you do get this argument: why should we, the non-university population or the ex-university population, finance the current generation of students? And there are answers to that, because the whole society is improved by that, and they get the benefits. The university education, you could say, is a merit good, even if you don't, even if you haven't had it yourself. The society will be better because there is a better educated population, and those are good arguments. But the tide at the moment is is going against it, and I think the complete increasing control by governments of what goes on in a university threatens, of course, its independence.
I see. Now to a slightly larger topic. What do you think are the pros and cons of a Brexit, and are you ultimately in favor or against it?
I'm against a Brexit. I think there are lots of deficiencies in the European Union. I think they could be repaired in principle. I think it's going to be very, very hard. It would be easier if we were in favor of the repairing rather than threatening to get out the whole time. If we were in favor of more integration, setting up a treasury, a proper central bank, public investment programs in Europe and things like that to get Europe growing again, I think we'd be a help, but we're not at the moment. And I think what would Britain do in a way outside the European Union? I dare say the City of London would be okay, but I think it would just sort of become more and more an extra state of the United States, and I don't think that is really what we want to do.
Definitely. What are your thoughts on the Syrian refugee crisis? What do you think are the economic consequences of taking in migrants?
Well, I don't think there's I don't think anyone really thinks that Europe is going to take in 5 or 6 or 10 million refugees, and I think that's sort of out of the question. Logically, you should just stop the war there, and then and create circumstances in which most of them can return, which is what they want to do if they had conditions of security. But the great powers can't agree what to do, and it will be very, very hard anyway. But I think the problem should be what I would say. I think the problem should be turned over to the Security Council, and the America and the United States, America and Russia should get together and say this is a threat to international peace.
One of my final questions is: are banks overregulated as a consequence of the 2008 crisis?
No, I don't think banks are overregulated. I think they're underregulated. Or at least I think the section of the banking system that causes the real problems are underregulated. We haven't really taken any steps to break up these universal banks into smaller units, so that they're still more or less free to use depositors' money for their own gambling and for their own investments, and we haven't really lessened the interconnection between banks across the globe. I think the rhetoric is still one of diversifying risk, developing new instruments, new financial instruments, financial innovation. That rhetoric has almost not been interrupted. It was interrupted briefly. I would reinstate Glass-Steagall, the Glass-Steagall principle, that I would separate investment banking from retail banking, and there should be no connection between the two, and banks should become too boring to fail.